'Cause I wanna love you for good or for bad. When times get sad and when we fight. And I wanna love you for good or for bad. When you make me mad, 'cause you're the love of my life.
The EDSA People Power Revolution in 1986 would go on to inspire similar pro-democracy uprisings elsewhere in the world. But 36 years later, the Marcoses are back in power. Not that they actually left anyway, but the son and namesake of the late dictator Ferdinand Marcos, enjoying significant leads in pre-election surveys, is in position to reclaim Malacanang. Now, one of the prevailing narratives being peddled today by its loyalists, the so-called golden years. Tonight, we'll debunk this lousy myth. We'll speak with two key officials, a former central bank governor and a former finance secretary who helped fix the economic mess left behind by Marcos and his cronies. Former central bank governor Jose Cuisia Jr. and former finance secretary Jesus Stanislao, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us tonight on the program. I'd like to start with a question regarding the kind of life under Marcos, the kind of economic conditions that we had, especially during the closing days or years of the Marcos regime, and the kind of mess that he left behind. I'd like to start with Mr. Stanislao.
Well, not just the closing years, but many years before the closing years. We were under a regime of controls, very tight regulation, and the people who were running the government made sure that the rules and the regulations were in the favor of friends, cronies, family, and relatives. It was not Filipino first. It was family first, friends first, and cronies first. So it was a government where everything was stacked up against everybody who did not belong to friends, family, and cronies. So competition was not allowed.
How did that kind of policy, that kind of scenario, affect the ordinary Filipino at that time?
It simply means that if you wanted to get dollars in order to travel abroad, you cannot easily get dollars because the dollars were reserved for the privileged. If you are an ordinary businessman and you wanted to get some credit from DBP or any one of the financial institutions, credit was reserved for the privileged. So they had all of the benefits stacked in their favor and against everybody else. And the best example of that would be for the ordinary person. You could not easily buy apples, grapes, oranges outside of Christmas because that was not allowed in. That was part of the rule. And why? Because dollars were rationed, and in the rationing of dollars, who do you think would get first crack at getting dollars?
How bad were the foreign exchange reserves of the Philippines at that time?
They were very bad, and maybe Governor Cuisia can tell you exactly where we were.
Okay.
When Governor Fernandez took over in 1984 from Governor Laya, he found out that the international reserves of the Philippines had actually gone to zero, actually below zero, because we ended up with a minus 400 million in terms of reserves. So that meant that we owed the foreign banks 400 million. And this is why they were very upset with the Philippines, because you will recall that the IMF discovered that the central bank was finagling with the figures, and they were overstating, they were window dressing the actual position of the central bank. So when he had a special audit done,
You cannot go on the basis of popularity, misinformation, lies, trolls, and whatever have you. We have to take very seriously the needs of the country and the demands of the Philippines, very much in line with our dreams and aspirations as a people. And I believe NEDA had done a wonderful job of putting together a document, Ambition 2040. That encapsulates, after interviewing 10,000 Filipinos or more, they listed the dreams and aspirations of Filipinos. And in effect, that requires a very significant effort moving forward with the commitment, the character, and the competence that we need in the President of the Philippines.
This was the situation under Marcos, and you're not seeing much with the campaign platform of Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. I mean, how do you explain the disconnect between those warnings that you mentioned and his immense popularity now? Aren't they quite obvious for people to see?
Well, they have been obviously using a lot of money to try to rewrite history. They have been using money to condition the minds of the Filipinos, to make them believe that the Marcos years were the golden years of the Philippines, which, as we have pointed out, are not true. But they have been doing this for the last maybe 10, 12 years, Christian. And this is why they have been able to some extent, I think, influence the thinking of particularly the younger people who are not really familiar with the martial law history, what happened during those martial law years. I think to some extent our education system has to be blamed for that, because they did not provide the right kind of history to these young people. No?
Okay, former Central Bank Governor Jose Cuisia Jr. and former Finance Secretary Jesus Stanislao, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us tonight on the program.
We really have to think in terms of the Philippines today, the possible post-COVID Philippines, and the requirements moving into the future. That requires quite a lot of personal discipline. That requires quite a lot of commitment, a good knowledge of economics, and then the ability to get as many sectors, including the private business sector, to work very closely with government. Now, all of these things will require a very significant type of leadership that we have not seen during the Marcos regime, neither have we seen in the Sun. So when you look at the Philippines today and the demands of the Philippine economy moving forward, one really has to wonder, what could we be going with a Bongbong presidency?
Okay, so I understand you and other officials or former officials have come up with your own set of recommendations, right? And with those recommendations, you have decided to endorse particular candidates. And who are they? Governor Cuisia.
Well, we, as we said in our letter, we believe that the best candidates to provide the national leadership for the Philippines is Vice President Leni Robredo and Senator Kiko Pangilinan.